I'm Carol Mitchell, 34 years old, currently clutching a lukewarm cup of punch while trying not to look completely out of place beside the refreshment table at my younger sister Becky's baby shower. It's been half a decade since I left Willow Creek behind for a marketing career in Chicago, and yet, standing in this community center decorated with soft pink streamers and floating balloons, it's painfully obvious my family still views me through the lens of what I lack. Not a prestigious job, not independence, just a husband. Mom, Eleanor Mitchell, offers her signature smile, the kind where her lips stretch but her eyes stay cool, as she adjusts the pastel balloon arch for the third time. Becky is surrounded, practically glowing, and she makes her way toward me with that grin I've known since childhood. Sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. Her eyes flicker with something just short of amusement, and I wonder, not for the first time, how they'd all react if they knew the truth I'd been keeping close. Soon, the doorbell will ring, setting into motion a series of events that no one in this room could possibly expect. Growing up in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania meant being wrapped tightly in a cocoon of small-town predictability. We had one main street, 3 churches, and more gossip than people. Everyone knew your family history, your SAT scores, and your weekend plans before you did. Within the Mitchell household, the family dynamic was never ambiguous. Becky, with her sunny blonde curls and innate ability to charm adults, was the golden child. From the moment she could walk, she danced her way into people's hearts. I, on the other hand, was always described as driven, a label that, coming from our mother, felt more like a polite reprimand than praise. Our home on Maple Avenue was a charming Victorian, with creaky floorboards and a picket fence, but inside, it was the stage for a carefully choreographed dance of favoritism. When Becky brought home a report card littered with B's, Mom would bake her warm chocolate chip cookies and declare how proud she was. When I arrived with straight A's and a certificate from the state science fair, I'd receive a distracted, "That's nice, dear," before she shifted her focus back to helping Becky practice pirouettes for her upcoming recital. There was one person, however, who always saw me. Dad, Robert Mitchell, was a gentleman, with laugh lines around his eyes and a love of quiet gestures. He would slip into my room late at night after dinner, offering small treasures, a vintage bookmark, a leather-bound notebook, once even a dusty second-hand camera after I showed interest in photography. "Don't let anyone dim your light, Carol," he'd whisper before closing the door. He was the buffer between me and the constant comparison, the only one who understood that my dreams didn't fit within the borders of Willow Creek. His sudden death 7 years ago from a heart attack left a crater that I'm still learning to navigate. I remembered the funeral vividly. Mom and Becky huddled together like statues of grief while I stood a few paces away, not quite included in their circle of mourning. It wasn't just the end of his life, it was the beginning of my emotional exile. When I announced, just months after the funeral, that I'd accepted a marketing position at Anderson & Burke in Chicago, I may as well have said I was moving to Mars. "But what about settling down here?" Mom had asked, her voice strained with disbelief. "Mark Edwards has always liked you." Mark Edwards, the boy who never left Willow Creek, who now managed his father's insurance agency and still drove the same beat-up truck from high school. That was Mom's idea of an ideal future for me. "I have a master's degree in marketing, Mom. This job is a major step up," I had responded as calmly as I could, already packing boxes in my mind. "It's an amazing opportunity." Her reply still haunts me. "Degrees don't keep you warm at night," she had said, wistfully, eyes drifting toward Becky, who had just announced her engagement to her high school sweetheart, James. On the day I left, Becky gave me a quick hug and mumbled, "I don't get why you'd want to leave, but good luck, I guess." That was the thing with Becky. She didn't mean to hurt. She just couldn't fathom a version of happiness that didn't look like hers. 5 years slipped by, we exchanged obligatory holiday cards, had monthly calls that dwindled into occasional texts, and kept up the facade of familial closeness. Meanwhile, I built something real. My apartment in downtown Chicago, with its sweeping view of Lake Michigan, became my safe haven. I poured myself into my work, climbing the ranks until I was leading Anderson & Burke's digital marketing division. My life was complex, full, and mine, but none of that ever made it into our family group chat. Then came Becky's email 3 months ago. Subject, "Baby on the way." It was breezy, excited, full of pastel emojis. She gushed about her pregnancy, James's new promotion, and the nursery decor she was obsessing over. But it was the final line that gutted me. "It would mean so much if you came home for the baby shower. Mom says it's been too long. We need to see your face before you become an aunt." That word hit harder than I expected. Suddenly I wasn't just the daughter who'd left. I was the distant relative with no emotional investment. I stared at that email for over an hour, the Chicago skyline twinkling behind me, and knew that my decision to attend wasn't just about showing up. It was about reclaiming a space I'd been pushed out of for too long. The baby shower venue matched every expectation. The Willow Creek Community Center's main hall, adorned in an endless array of pink tones, smelled faintly of vanilla candles and deviled eggs. Aunt Patricia, Mom's older sister, greeted me with an affectionate squeal and a rib-crushing hug. "Well, look at you, city girl, you're glowing," she said, holding me at arm's length like I was some celebrity on loan from a fancier life. Patricia had always been different, opinionated, well-traveled, and unafraid of ruffling feathers. She was the only relative who'd ever visited me in Chicago, though she never mentioned it to Mom or Becky. Cousin Rachel was juggling 3 toddlers when she spotted me. "Carol, you're really here," she said with a tired laugh, her youngest hanging from her leg like a koala. "These little monsters don't leave me a second to breathe. You're lucky, free to come and go." That word again. Free. It hovered in the air between us like a veiled accusation. In Willow Creek, freedom was often code for selfishness. At the gift table, Becky's best friend Megan, acting as shower sergeant, gave me the usual icy greeting. "Oh, Carol, didn't think we'd see you. You can put your gift there. Becky's opening them after lunch." Her smile was as genuine as a plastic fork. I placed my present, wrapped in silver paper and a satin bow, among the others. Inside was a delicate, handcrafted baby bracelet from a Chicago artisan, complete with a blank charm waiting for the baby's name and birth date. I'd spent weeks choosing it, hoping it might convey what words couldn't. As more guests poured in, I retreated to the periphery. I watched Mom beam at Becky, resplendent in a flowing blush-pink maternity gown that accentuated her bump. She looked radiant, glowing with the anticipation of motherhood, and for just a fleeting moment, I could see it, the warmth, the pride, the family circle I'd always hovered just outside of. A familiar ache settled in my chest, not quite envy, but a deep-rooted sorrow over the intangible connection I'd never managed to forge with my mother. It wasn't about what Becky had, it was about what I had never been allowed to become in her eyes. I exhaled slowly, squaring my shoulders, preparing myself for the parade of polite criticisms, passive-aggressive remarks, and invasive questions that always came when my family gathered, but nothing could have prepared me for just how suffocating it would be. "Carol, you actually made it?" Becky's voice sliced through the room, laced with faux surprise and a performative warmth that made my stomach twist. She waddled over, her hands resting protectively over her prominent belly, the unspoken center of attention. All around us, conversations quieted as faces turned to observe this rare sighting of the prodigal daughter returned. Their eyes scanned me, part curious, part judging, like I was an exhibit being unveiled. These women had known me since I was a child, watched me run barefoot through backyard barbecues, seen my teenage rebellion, and eventually my exit from this insular town. And now they studied me like an unfamiliar version of someone they once knew. I forced a smile and leaned in to hug Becky around her bump, awkward and hesitant. She still wore that same strawberry-scented shampoo she'd used since high school. Some things never changed. "Let me look at you," she said, stepping back, her eyes scanning my figure. "Still as thin as ever. Must be nice not to have to worry about baby weight." Her words, wrapped in a sugary smile, landed like a stone in my stomach. "You look beautiful, Becky. Pregnancy really suits you," I replied, and I meant it. She did look radiant, her cheeks flushed with that unmistakable glow of motherhood. Before I could escape to safer ground, Mrs. Peterson, my old high school English teacher, swooped in with a punch glass in hand. "Carol Mitchell, what a lovely surprise. We were just saying how Becky's carrying on the family tradition, settling down here in good old Willow Creek. And you're still in Chicago, right? Not married yet?" The question wasn't just small talk. It was loaded with the weight of expectation and veiled disappointment. I opened my mouth, but Becky beat me to it. "Oh, Carol's married to her job, aren't you, sis?" She linked her arm through mine as if sharing an inside joke. "Too busy climbing the corporate ladder for dating." Laughter erupted from a nearby group. "My career is going well, yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "But that's not all there is to me." "Oh, she sends the most interesting Christmas cards," Mom chimed in, appearing beside us. "Just Carol posing in front of different landmarks in Chicago. No boyfriend, no family photos, like normal people send." My face flushed. "I thought you might like seeing where I live." "The architecture, the skyline." "Well, it would be even nicer to see you settling down one of these days," Mom said, patting my arm. "What are you now, 34? Not getting any younger, dear." Before I could muster a retort, Megan clapped her hands like a camp counselor. "All right, ladies, time for some fun. Baby shower games. Everyone to the main table." The first game was a yarn challenge, guessing the circumference of Becky's belly. When it was my turn, I guessed too low, significantly. "Carol has no clue about pregnancy bodies," Becky laughed, clutching her bump. "That's what happens when you're the last single woman in the room." More laughter. I glanced around. Several other women were unmarried, but none of them were being publicly roasted. In Willow Creek, my singleness wasn't just noticed, it was examined like a blemish. The second game was even worse. A trivia quiz called Who Knows Mommy Best, full of questions about Becky's cravings, nursery themes, and childhood memories. I fumbled through them, barely answering a third correctly. Becky gave an exaggerated sigh. "Well, I guess that's what happens when you only call once a month and visit every 5 years." No one mentioned that phone calls work both ways, or that I'd invited Becky to visit me in Chicago multiple times, offering to pay for her flights, even. But she always declined. "Too far," she'd say. "Too expensive." Excusing myself, I made a beeline for the restroom. I locked the door, leaned against it, and finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. "They're worse than I expected. Are you sure about this?" The reply came within seconds. "On our way. ETA 30 minutes. Love you." I steadied myself, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at my reflection. The party was only halfway over. Back in the main room, Becky was settled in a decorated armchair, a faux throne adorned with pink satin and ribbons. She raised her hand to quiet the room. "Before we start," she said sweetly, "I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate this special time with us. And a special shout out to my sister Carol, who actually managed to tear herself away from her very important life in Chicago to be with her family for once." She gave an exaggerated wink, and the room chuckled. I smiled tightly, jaw clenched, the effort of staying composed weighing heavily. Gift after gift was opened. Soft blankets, tiny outfits, a handmade quilt that was passed around for admiration. When she opened my carefully wrapped silver bracelet, she barely glanced at it before handing it to Mom. Very nice," Mom murmured, placing it aside without fanfare. "It's sterling silver," I explained, trying to sound upbeat. "You can engrave the baby's name and birth date on it once she arrives. It's from a Chicago artisan." "How fancy," Becky replied with a tight smile. "Let's hope she doesn't lose it at daycare." Later, as cupcakes and fruit punch were passed around, Becky cornered me near the dessert table. "Seriously?" she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Still not dating anyone at your age?" "My age?" I echoed, trying to keep the edge out of my tone. "You make 34 sound like I should be preparing a will." "Well, it's not young in the baby department," she replied with a smirk, rubbing her belly. "Tick-tock and all that. I'm just concerned, sis. Don't you want what I have? A husband, a baby on the way, roots?" Before I could respond, Mom joined us, beaming. "Look at my beautiful daughter," she cooed at Becky, just glowing with her first baby. I stood right there, invisible. I'm her daughter too, I thought bitterly, but swallowed the words. I already knew saying them would only make me sound petty. "Still single, sweetheart?" Becky asked, louder now, her syrupy tone drawing the attention of several nearby guests. "No special someone hiding in that big city?" Mom chuckled and rested her hand on Becky's shoulder. "She's having her first baby. You should be taking notes, Carol. This could be you someday, if you prioritize the right things." I said nothing, feeling the familiar burn of disappointment seep into my chest. Just as the silence thickened and my throat tightened, the sound of the doorbell rang out. And despite everything that had already happened, I felt the first flutter of hope. Everything shifted the moment I smiled. Just as Megan prepared to introduce another light-hearted game, something involving baby food jars and blindfolds, the heavy door of the community center creaked open. Conversations faltered. Every head turned instinctively toward the entrance, expecting perhaps another neighbor with a gift in tow. But what they saw left them stunned. There stood Thomas, his tall frame neatly dressed in a tailored navy blazer that accentuated the ocean blue of his eyes. His presence was calm, collected, quietly commanding. In his arms was 4-year-old Lily, her favorite yellow sundress fluttering slightly with the breeze from outside. Her dark curls were adorned with a daisy clip, her wide brown eyes taking in the sea of unfamiliar faces. For one suspended heartbeat, the room froze in a tableau of confusion. No one recognized them. This man, clearly not local, and the little girl, both radiant and clearly out of place. Didn't belong to Willow Creek's inner circle. But Thomas's eyes found mine across the distance, and that familiar, steady smile of his grounded me. I felt my nerves quiet just enough to stand up straighter, to prepare. "Sorry we're late," he said warmly, his voice deep and calm as it echoed through the hushed room. Traffic from the airport was worse than we anticipated. He strode forward with quiet confidence, Lily squirming excitedly to be put down. He let her down gently, and she immediately scampered toward me. "Who's this?" Mom's voice cut through the tension, tight with confusion and rapidly building anxiety. I took a deep breath that felt like it carried the weight of 5 years. "Mom, Becky, everyone," I began, projecting my voice with a calmness I didn't quite feel. "This is Thomas." I paused. "My husband." The silence that followed was absolute, thick, unbelieving. I watched as Becky's mouth slowly fell open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her hand drifted instinctively to her belly, as if to shield her unborn child from the jolt of my words. Around her, the guests looked between me and Thomas, like they were waiting for the punchline of an elaborate joke. "You're what?" Mom finally asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though even saying the words was difficult. Before I could respond, Thomas stepped in with his characteristic grace. He extended his hand politely to my mother. "Thomas Matthews," he said, "Carol's husband. We've been married for 5 years. It's truly a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Mitchell." But Mom didn't take his hand. She stared, stunned, her eyes darting from me to Thomas and back again. And then Lily's small voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a bell. "Mommy." She raced forward and threw herself into my arms. I knelt down, scooping her up into a tight embrace, my eyes closing briefly as I breathed in the familiar, comforting scent of her strawberry shampoo and the faint, sugary stickiness of travel day snacks. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, steadying my voice against the wave of emotion rising in my chest. "Did you have a good flight?" "Daddy let me have 2 cookies," she declared proudly, oblivious to the dozen slack-jawed expressions around us. There was a collective gasp. Aunt Patricia looked positively delighted. Megan looked scandalized. With Lily resting on my hip, I turned to face the crowd. "And this," I said with quiet pride, "is our daughter, Lily. She turned 4 last month." "4?" Mom echoed, her face going pale. "You've had a child. Our grandchild. For 4 years," she said slowly, as if each word was a puzzle. "And you never told us?" Becky, visibly pale, sank into the nearest chair. One hand rested protectively on her belly, the other rose to cover her mouth. James moved swiftly behind her, placing steadying hands on her shoulders. "I think," Aunt Patricia interjected, her voice calm but firm, "we should give Carol a chance to explain." She didn't look shocked. In fact, the subtle smile tugging at the corner of her lips suggested she'd suspected the truth long before today. Mom's voice returned, louder this time, now tinged with unmistakable hurt. "Explain," she said sharply. "Explain how my daughter has been married for 5 years, with a child, and never said a word? How does a mother even begin to process something like that?" Thomas stepped beside me, his hand pressing gently into the small of my back, a silent gesture of reassurance that steadied me. "We understand this is overwhelming," he said evenly, looking around the room. "But there's more, and it's only fair that you hear it all." I turned to look at him, realizing what he was about to do. We hadn't planned to reveal everything, not today, not like this, but the steady determination in his eyes told me this was the moment for complete honesty. "We're expecting another baby," Thomas announced. "Carol is about 4 months along." A stunned silence was followed by a rising tide of exclamations. I slowly unzipped the lightweight jacket I'd worn over my dress, revealing the gentle curve of my growing belly. It wasn't as pronounced as Becky's, but it was clearly there. Chaos broke loose. Becky burst into tears, her cries echoing through the suddenly uncomfortable silence. Mom staggered backward, collapsing into a chair as though her knees had given out. Around the room, whispers turned into murmurs, and then into a full-blown swell of hushed gossip. Megan looked like someone had doused her with ice water, horrified, confused, but utterly unable to look away. "You're pregnant?" Becky wailed, her voice rising. "You came to my baby shower pregnant and didn't say anything? How could you be so selfish?" The accusation hit me like a slap. "Selfish," I repeated, my voice cracking. "I've kept my life private because every time I've tried to share something meaningful with this family, it's been ignored, minimized, brushed aside like it didn't matter." "That's not true," Mom said quickly, her voice raw. "Isn't it?" I asked, the words tumbling out now, years of frustration surfacing. When I got accepted to Northwestern with a full scholarship, you complained about the cost of moving. When I landed my first major account, you changed the subject to Becky's engagement. Every milestone in my life was an afterthought compared to anything happening with Becky. So your answer was to hide a marriage, a child? Mom's voice cracked, trembling. Do you know how cruel that is? Before I could respond, Lily looked up at me with confusion. Mommy, why is that lady crying? She asked, pointing directly at Becky. I kissed her forehead, my heart breaking. It's complicated, sweetie, I said gently. Remember what we talked about? Today you're meeting new family. That's your Aunt Becky and Grandma Eleanor. The ones in the pictures? She asked, wide-eyed. Yes, baby, the ones in the pictures. I had made sure Lily knew who they were, despite the distance. Our home in Chicago displayed photos, smiling faces frozen in time, because I wanted her to understand where she came from, even if the emotional ties were frayed. Thomas stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. We didn't come to steal anyone's moment, he said. We came because it's time, for Lily, for our next child, and for all of us. And Patricia moved forward and opened her arms. Well, she said, her voice rich with warmth as she crouched beside Lily, I, for one, am absolutely delighted to finally meet this beautiful little girl. I'm your great Aunt Patricia, sweetheart. Would you like a cupcake? Lily looked at me with wide eyes, silently seeking permission. I gave her a small nod, and after a moment's hesitation, she slipped her tiny hand into Patricia's. She walked carefully beside her, glancing back every few steps to make sure I was still watching. I gave her a reassuring smile, which seemed to settle her nerves. The ice had finally broken. Slowly, cautiously, a few guests began to approach Thomas. The crowd's curiosity gradually gave way to polite introductions, hands extended, small smiles exchanged. They were trying, awkwardly and stiffly, to make sense of this new reality. James, having comforted Becky enough to leave her side, briefly, approached Thomas with his usual calm demeanor. He extended a hand. This is quite a surprise, he said. His expression gave nothing away. But congratulations on the new baby, and everything. Thomas accepted the handshake, responding with a quiet, thank you, it means a lot. But it was clear, the celebration had taken a sharp turn. Whatever joy had filled the room earlier had now shifted its gravitational pull. The focus had moved entirely away from Becky's impending motherhood. It now revolved around me, my secret marriage, my daughter, and the baby growing inside me. I could see it in Becky's face. Beneath the polite mask, she struggled to maintain. There was pain, betrayal, humiliation, and despite all the slights I had endured, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. This wasn't how I'd wanted things to unfold. I hadn't come to ruin her day, but years of being overlooked and quietly pushed aside had left me few alternatives. Mom's voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a blade. I think Carol and I need to have a private conversation. Now. Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and began walking toward the small office near the back of the community center. Her spine was rigid with tension. I felt Thomas squeeze my hand, his touch steadying me before I followed her, leaving him behind to manage our daughter and the unraveling social dynamic. Inside the small room, the hum of the party faded behind the closed door. Mom turned to face me. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. How could you? She demanded, her voice shaking. How could you keep my granddaughter from me? For 4 years. What kind of daughter does that? I drew a breath, trying to hold steady. The kind who got tired of being treated like she was never enough, I said quietly. Mom, I tried to tell you. I really did. She scoffed, but I pressed on. Do you remember Thanksgiving 5 years ago? I mentioned I was seeing someone special. I even tried to steer the conversation toward Thomas, but you spent the entire dinner talking about Becky and James house hunting. Mom opened her mouth, paused, then closed it again. There was a flicker of something. Recognition, maybe? You barely said anything about him, she said defensively. How was I supposed to know it was serious? I tried again when we got engaged, I said. I called you to share the news. Do you remember what you said? You interrupted me halfway through and changed the subject to Becky's promotion at the elementary school. Her brow furrowed as she visibly strained to recall. You never actually said you were engaged. Because you didn't let me finish. My voice broke slightly. I stopped trying after that. Every time I tried to share something big, you shifted the spotlight back to Becky. When we decided to get married, it was spontaneous. A small ceremony, just a few close friends in the Chicago Botanic Garden, By then, it felt easier to just live my life without trying to earn your attention. And when Lily was born, her voice cracked. What was your excuse then? I looked down, guilt pressing heavily on my chest. I did try, I said softly. I sent you an email, with photos, a full announcement. You replied with 2 sentences. She's cute. Becky and James are thinking of starting a family soon. Mom looked stunned. I don't remember that. Of course you don't, I said, pulling out my phone. But I do. I kept it. I've kept all of it. I handed her the phone, the email already pulled up. She read it slowly, her face changing defiance, softening into confusion, then slowly into the early stages of remorse. I don't know what to say. It's been like this my whole life, I said, the words coming faster now. Everything I accomplished was measured against Becky, and found lacking. When Lily was born, something in me broke. I couldn't let her grow up feeling like she was never quite enough. "Will you punish me?" Mom said, her voice a little softer now. "By keeping her a secret?" It wasn't punishment. It was protection. For Lily. For me. I couldn't keep fighting for your approval. I had to choose peace. I rested a hand on my baby bump. It fluttered in response, as if sensing my emotions. "Do you know what Thomas said after that one Christmas we spent here, the only time he met you? He said, 'Now I understand why you never feel good enough.' That was after one dinner, Mom. One." Mom sat down heavily in a nearby chair. For the first time, she looked her age. "I never meant to make you feel that way," she whispered. "I know you didn't mean to," I said, "but intention doesn't erase impact." I stayed standing, my spine stiff from the weight of years I had carried alone. "Do you remember when I won that national marketing competition in college, the one that came with the scholarship?" She nodded slowly. "I called home, ecstatic. And you said, 'That's nice, dear, but Becky's having trouble picking her wedding colors.'" I let the silence stretch out. Moment. My national win versus her color swatches was my life in a nutshell. A knock on the door broke the moment. Aunt Patricia peeked in, a mixture of empathy and urgency on her face. "Sorry to interrupt, but Becky's quite upset. She's asking for her mother." Mom stood, frozen by indecision. "I should go to her," she said. "Of course you should," I said, bitterness lacing my words. "Becky needs you, just like always." "Carol, that's not fair." "Isn't it?" I snapped. "Even now, after you've just learned that you have a grandchild you never knew, and another grandchild on the way, your first instinct is to run to Becky? She's pregnant and upset." "So am I. I'm pregnant too, Mom. I'm your daughter too. But I've never been enough, have I?" Patricia stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. "Eleanor," she said gently but firmly, "I love you. But Carol is right. You've always favored Becky, and whether you admit it or not, everyone has seen it." Mom turned, wide-eyed, staring at her sister as if she'd just betrayed her deepest secret. "Betrayal? That's not true," Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. "I love both my daughters equally." I took a moment to steady my breath before answering. "Love isn't just a feeling, Mom," I said quietly. "It's not just saying the words. It's action. It's showing up. It's listening. It's making someone feel seen and valued. That's what love is." "I've always been proud of you," she insisted, her brows pulling together as if that alone proved her case. "Being proud isn't the same as being present," I replied. "It's not the same as asking about my work, my goals, or my family without changing the subject to Becky the moment I start speaking." Mom opened her mouth as if to refute it, but then closed it again. The pause, the sudden searching look in her eyes. That silence said more than any argument she could have made. It was the first time she truly stopped to think. "I think," Aunt Patricia interjected gently, stepping closer, "that there's been a lot of hurt on all sides. Eleanor, you do need to reflect on how your actions, or inaction, have contributed to this rift. And Carol," she added, turning to me with a kind but firm look, "keeping Lily a secret was a choice that caused real pain. Even if your reasons made sense at the time, the impact was still there." I nodded slowly, the truth of her words landing softly. "I never wanted it to unfold this way," I admitted, my voice catching slightly. "I truly wanted Lily to know her grandmother, her aunt. I imagined her running through your garden, laughing, asking questions about family history. But every time I thought about reaching out, I'd remember how small I felt in this family, how easy it was for my voice to get lost." Mom's eyes softened, a tear finally escaping. "She's beautiful," she said quietly. "She looks like you did at that age." "She has Thomas's eyes," I replied, the words bringing a warmth to my chest. "And his kindness. She's curious and joyful, And brave. And your spirit, Thomas added, stepping into the room with Lily perched on his hip. He gave a small smile, nodding to both me and my mother. Sorry to interrupt, but someone's asking for her mom. Lily immediately wriggled to get down, running toward me. I bent to pick her up, shifting my posture carefully to accommodate my growing belly. You okay, sweetheart? I asked. She nodded solemnly. The crying lady wants to talk to you, she said in a stage whisper. The crying lady, I said with a soft chuckle, is your Aunt Becky. I glanced toward Mom. We should talk to her, together, as a family. For a moment Mom hesitated, then, with a slow, almost reluctant nod, she said, yes, as a family. As we made our way back to the main room, Thomas gently held me back for a second. You okay? He asked in a low voice. I met his gaze and offered a tired but honest reply. Getting there. It's all coming out now. No more secrets. He leaned in and kissed my forehead. I'm right beside you, always. With Lily resting against my hip and Thomas's steady hand guiding me forward, we returned to the hall. Most of the guests had made quiet exits during the earlier chaos, leaving only the inner circle, immediate family, Aunt Patricia, and Megan, who hovered protectively near Becky. Becky sat alone in the throne-like chair she'd used to open gifts earlier. Her mascara had smudged from crying, and her eyes were still glassy with emotion. James stood behind her, hands gently placed on her shoulders, offering silent support. The air was thick with tension as we stepped back into the room. Lily, sensing the charged atmosphere, tightened her hold on me. I leaned down to whisper softly, You want to see the cupcakes again, love? She nodded quickly, and Aunt Patricia stepped in at just the right moment. Come on, little one. Let's see if one with extra sprinkles. She took Lily's hand, guiding her away to give the adults space. I think we need to clear the air, I said, breaking the silence. Becky looked up. Her eyes were puffy, her voice shaky. Clear the air? She repeated. You show up on my baby shower, my special day, and drop a bomb like this. You expect us to just, what, hug it out? I understand that you're hurt, I said gently. Hurt? She snapped. You've been lying to us for years, Carol, years. You're my sister, and you've been living a whole life I knew nothing about. A husband, a child, another baby on the way, and you kept it all from me. I don't even recognize you anymore. I stepped closer, my voice steady but quiet. That's the thing, Becky. You never really knew me. Neither of you did, I added, glancing toward Mom. You had this idea of who I was. A workaholic, a spinster too ambitious to settle down. That narrative was easier than actually asking about my life. That's not true, Becky said. I asked about Chicago all the time. You ask, sure, I replied. But when I started to answer, you always redirected the conversation. Something about Willow Creek, your latest party plans, or your life. Every time. James shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Maybe I should give you both some privacy. No, Becky said, gripping his hand. I want you here. I need someone on my side. This isn't about sides, Thomas said calmly. It's about understanding. Carol's tried, more than once, to bring you into her life. She was shut down each time. That's not fair, Becky said. That's not what happened. Actually it is, James interjected gently, surprising everyone. Becky turned to him, confused. Beck, I love you, he said softly, but he's right. I've seen you do it. You dominate phone calls. I've heard you change the subject when Carol talked about work or her life in Chicago. You're taking their side? She asked, stunned. I'm not taking sides, James said. I'm just pointing out what I've observed. Do you remember last Christmas? You were on the phone with Carol for almost 40 minutes, telling her about our kitchen remodel in full detail. When you hung up, I asked what was new with her and you said nothing really, same old Chicago stuff. Becky looked down, her expression turning thoughtful. I took a breath, feeling the weight of everything pressing forward. I should have tried harder, I said. That's on me. I should have pushed to be heard, but it got exhausting, and eventually keeping it all to myself just seemed easier. But marriage, a child, Mom's voice broke as she spoke. Those aren't small things. How could you keep something like that from your family? It didn't happen all at once, I said, sitting down across from Becky. Thomas and I met at a marketing conference in Boston. He was presenting a branding workshop. I was speaking on digital strategy. We ended up in the same panel discussion, stayed late talking, then had dinner. It was the kind of connection you can't explain. I smiled at the memory. We both lived in Chicago. He had just started his own graphic design firm. We dated for about a year, fell in love, and when he proposed, it was spontaneous. On a snowy night, On our apartment's balcony, we were drinking hot cocoa. A pause. We got married a few weeks later, a tiny ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, just us, a few close friends, and the tulips. We were at the Chicago Botanic Garden, Thomas's favorite place in the city. It had always been a peaceful escape for us, a place where we could breathe, laugh, and imagine a future together. On that particular evening, under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights and surrounded by blooming tulips, he turned to me and asked the question that changed everything. There was no grand speech, no dramatic gesture, just quiet certainty in his eyes. We got married 2 months later, a small ceremony, just our closest friends, no elaborate reception, no family politics. It was intimate and perfect. I would have come, Mom said softly, her voice tinged with regret. If you had invited me, I would have been there. Would you have? I asked, not unkindly, but with the quiet honesty we'd all avoided for years. Would you have come without turning it into something it wasn't? Without pointing out how rushed it seemed? Without criticizing how little time we'd known each other compared to Becky and James? Without reminding me, again, how my choices didn't look like hers? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was answer enough. When I found out I was pregnant with Lily, I continued, I wanted to tell you. I had it all planned. But then Becky called, excited about her promotion, and just like that, the entire conversation was about her. I tried again after Lily was born. I sent photos, a heartfelt email. But your reply was so short. It hurt. I paused, then added, and after that, the longer I waited, the harder it became. Every missed moment turned into a reason not to reach out. Becky, sitting across from me, looked less angry now and more confused. She tilted her head slightly. So why now? She asked. Why here? Why drop this at my baby shower? Thomas and I exchanged a look, a silent conversation we'd had many times. Because of the babies, he said simply. Our daughter. He gestured toward Lily, still happily licking frosting off her fingers beside Aunt Patricia. And our son. He placed a hand on my belly. And your daughter, he added, glancing at Becky's rounded stomach. They're cousins. They're family. We didn't want them growing up as strangers just because of adult choices and old wounds. Mom blinked, her eyes moving to my stomach. It's a boy? She asked. I nodded. We found out last month. Lily's over the moon. She's been helping pick names. A single tear slipped down Mom's cheek. A grandson and a granddaughter, she whispered. And Lily's been asking about her grandma, Thomas added gently, ever since she saw your photo. You have pictures of me? Becky asked, her voice full of surprise. Of us? Of course we do, I replied. Our home is filled with family pictures. We've told Lily stories. She knows about Willow Creek. She knows she has an aunt and a grandmother here, even if she hadn't met you until today. Something shifted in their expressions, both Mom and Becky. The realization that they had unknowingly been part of Lily's life, even from a distance, seemed to soften them. Their presence in our home, even if unacknowledged until now, had been real. I should have tried harder, I said quietly, but so should you. Relationships aren't one-sided. They're built by everyone involved. A heavy silence fell as those words settled over the room. The truth of them didn't need to be argued. It was James who finally spoke. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, this isn't how any of us expected today to go, but maybe it's what needed to happen. He looked between Becky and me. You're sisters, and you're both about to be mothers. Isn't that something worth building from? Becky looked at me then. Really looked. Her gaze was open, reflective. I never realized, she said softly, that you felt so overlooked. In my mind, you were always the one who got out, the one who made it. I blinked. You were jealous of me? She nodded slowly. Yeah, you had everything I wanted. Freedom, adventures. You didn't have to stay behind and live up to expectations. You were smart, independent. Even Dad used to say, Carol sees the world differently. I envied that. I envied you, I admitted. You had Mom's approval. You had the kind of wedding she dreamed of, a life that fit her vision. You were the daughter who made sense. Becky laughed, short and sharp, almost a little hysterical. So we've spent all these years resenting each other for lives we didn't actually want? Apparently, I said, a reluctant smile tugging at my lips. What a waste of time, Becky muttered, shaking her head. She wiped away another tear, then looked back at me. I want to know my niece and my nephew when he arrives. I want Lily to know her cousin. Can we start there? It was a small gesture, a cautious olive branch, but in that moment, it meant everything. "I'd like that," I said sincerely. Mom had been silent during this exchange, but now she stepped forward. Her voice, usually so commanding, was hesitant. "I've made mistakes," she admitted. "With both of you. I see that now. I never meant to make you feel less important, Carol. And Becky. I never meant to place so much pressure on you to be perfect." Thomas nodded respectfully. "We've all made choices that brought us here. But the good news is, we're here now. It's not too late." Just then, Lily came bounding over, her face gleaming with chocolate frosting. "Mommy," she chirped, holding up her doll. "Can I show Grandma my doll? I brought Rosie on the plane." That innocent question broke what little tension remained. Mom knelt slowly, her arms opening in a gesture that was both uncertain and deeply emotional. "I'd love to see your doll, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily beamed and retrieved Rosie from Thomas's bag, already launching into an elaborate explanation of the doll's wardrobe. "She has 3 dresses and 2 pairs of shoes," Lily said seriously. "The blue one is for parties." I stood still, watching the scene unfold. My daughter on her grandmother's lap, animated and joyful, sharing her world with someone who had been a stranger only hours ago. I glanced at Becky. Her expression was complicated, still wounded, still confused, but also touched by something else. Understanding, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. "She's beautiful," Becky said quietly. "She has your smile." I smiled, this time without effort. "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, and it certainly wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was something, a beginning, a step. The community center had quieted, the pink decorations now half taken down, the scent of vanilla cupcakes lingering in the air. Most of the guests had gone, leaving behind the remnants of what had started as a typical baby shower but had become something else entirely. Something deeper. Only our closest family remained: Mom, Becky and James, Aunt Patricia, Thomas, Lily, who was now nestled comfortably in her grandmother's lap, explaining with great seriousness which of Rosie's dresses was appropriate for school. And me, still standing, still breathing, still healing. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't standing alone. "Parties," Lily declared with the utmost seriousness. "The blue one is for parties." "It's very pretty," Mom replied, carefully holding the tiny fabric dress between her fingers like it was something fragile and precious. Her tone was softer than I'd heard all day. I stood across the room, watching the two of them, a swirling tide of emotion crashing silently inside me. There was something deeply moving about the sight of my daughter interacting with my mother. 2 people connected by blood but separated for so long by years of silence and distance. Thomas came to stand beside me, holding 2 paper cups of tea. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, concerned. I accepted the tea and took a sip before answering. "I'm not sure what I am," I admitted. "Relieved, maybe. Exhausted for sure, and a little hopeful, I think." He nodded, his gaze drifting to where Lily was animatedly describing Rosie's shoes to her grandmother. "It's been a day," he agreed, "but I think coming here was the right call, bringing Lily. It mattered." I leaned into his side, grateful for his steadiness. "Thank you. For being here. For supporting me through all of this. I know it wasn't easy." "Hey," he said with a small smile, "for better or worse, remember?" He kissed the top of my head. "Besides, Lily deserves to know all of her family, even the messy parts." Across the room, I noticed Becky watching us. She had one hand resting protectively on her belly and a look on her face I couldn't quite place. Contemplative, maybe. After a pause, she crossed the room to us. "Can we talk?" she asked, nodding toward the kitchenette. "Just as sisters." I nodded and gave Thomas's hand a quick squeeze before following her. In the small kitchenette, Becky leaned against the counter, her posture more guarded now, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About how I always redirected conversations back to myself. I never realized I was doing that." "Most people don't," I said gently. "It's not like you meant to hurt me." "Still," she said, twisting her wedding ring nervously, "I feel awful thinking about all the times you tried to share something important, and I just steamrolled right over it." "I could have been more direct," I offered. "I could have said, 'Hey Becky, shut up and listen, I'm getting married.'" She gave a small laugh. "You probably should have." A silence passed, not uncomfortable, but reflective. "James said something to me while you were talking to Mom," Becky said. "He said that sometimes, when people grow up in a certain family dynamic, They keep playing the same roles, without realizing it, like we were still acting out the parts we were given as kids. The golden child and the afterthought, I said quietly, then winced. Sorry, that was harsher than I meant. No, Becky replied. It was honest, and maybe we needed some honesty. She took a deep breath. For what it's worth, I never saw you as an afterthought. You were always the brave one. You got out, you had ambition, you built a life. I admired that. I envied it, actually. I envied you, I admitted. You had Mom's attention, Dad's quiet pride, a life plan that everyone respected. You knew what you wanted. Nothing came easy, she said. I just made it look easy. Do you know how scared I am to become a mother? I blinked. You? But you're so good with kids, you're literally a teacher. Teaching 20 kids for a few hours a day is one thing. Raising 124/7? Terrifying. She looked down at her belly. I have dreams where I forget to feed her, or I leave her at the grocery store. I wake up sweating. I smiled, not unsympathetically. Join the club. I cried every day for the first 2 weeks after Lily was born. Thomas had to Google, is it normal for new mothers to sob while changing diapers? That made Becky laugh. A full, genuine laugh that echoed faintly off the tiled walls. It reminded me of when we were kids and used to sneak downstairs to watch old rom-coms together after Mom had gone to bed. Is it normal? She asked, still smiling. Apparently very, I said. Hormones, sleep deprivation, existential panic. It's a beautiful mix. But you figured it out. Eventually, I said, mostly. Lily still eats cereal for dinner sometimes, but she's happy, she's thriving. Becky glanced out toward the main room, where Lily was now showing James her doll's hidden shoe compartment. She's amazing, Carol. You're doing a really great job. Thanks, I said, genuinely touched. And you will too. You have James, and he seems like he's already in full dad mode. He's read 5 parenting books, Becky said, with a chuckle, and made flashcards. Thomas recorded himself reading bedtime stories for Lily to listen to when he traveled. He did different voices for each character. Becky grinned. That's ridiculously sweet. He's the best, I said. I got lucky. Becky hesitated, then said, I'd like to get to know him. And Lily, if that's okay. I'd like that too, I said, my heart softening. And I'd love for you to be a real aunt to my daughter. Not just birthdays and Christmas cards, but someone she actually knows. I want that, Becky said, blinking quickly. Sorry, stupid pregnancy hormones. Tell me about it, I said, dabbing my eyes. Doesn't get any easier the second time around. A silence fell again, but it was a comfortable one now, a new kind of quiet. After a moment, Becky asked, Can I? She gestured gently toward my belly. I took her hand and guided it to where our son had been kicking all afternoon. We waited, breath held, and then, a sharp nudge. Oh, Becky gasped, her face lit up. That's amazing. Mine mostly does flips and makes me want to throw up. Lily was the same. I lived on saltines and ginger ale for 2 months. Me too, she said, genuinely delighted at the shared misery. From the main room, Mom's voice called, Girls, Lily wants to show us something on Thomas's phone. Family pictures, he says. Becky and I exchanged a look. There was still pain between us, still questions, but something unspoken passed between us now. Recognition, perhaps. Should we? She asked. I smiled. I think we should. Should I warn you? I said with a teasing smile. There are quite a few ridiculous holiday sweater photos in there. Thomas has this thing for themed family pictures. James is the same way, Becky replied, grinning. Last Christmas, he made us dress like elves, ears and all, for our holiday card. He even made the dog wear a bell collar. As we rejoined the others, a tentative sense of hope began to unfurl inside me. No, things weren't perfect. Years of miscommunication and emotional distance couldn't be erased in one afternoon. But for the first time in what felt like forever, we were really talking. No filters, no facades. Just honesty and tentative connection. Thomas had connected his phone to the community center's modest projector system. On the screen, a vibrant photo appeared. Our little family at the Chicago Zoo. Lily was front and center, grinning up at a giraffe while holding out a handful of leaves. That's me feeding the giraffe, she announced to the small crowd that had gathered. His tongue was purple. Thomas is quite the photographer, Aunt Patricia noted, tilting her head to admire the angle and lighting in the shot. It's my hobby, Thomas replied modestly. I've documented pretty much every major and minor moment since Lily was born. And our wedding too, I added as he swiped to another image. a breathtaking photo of us standing beneath flowering cherry trees at the Botanic Garden, our hands intertwined, eyes locked. Mom made a soft, involuntary sound. When I turned to her, I saw her eyes shimmering. "You were a beautiful bride," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you," I replied, just as softly. The slideshow continued. Lily's first wobbly steps on the living room rug, her messy-faced third birthday party, preschool graduation and a sparkly tiara, family vacations, quiet Sunday mornings, a candid snap of us cooking pancakes in pajamas. The photos captured not just milestones but the magic of everyday life, frozen in time through Thomas's lens. "I wish we had been there for these," Mom murmured eventually, her voice thick with regret. She was staring at a picture of Lily asleep with her head on Thomas's shoulder during a train ride. "You can be there for the ones to come," Thomas said, his tone kind but firm, leaving no ambiguity in the offer. "We'd like that," James said, his arm wrapped around Becky's shoulders. "Maybe you could visit us after the babies are born." "Both babies," he added, glancing between Becky and me. "Or," I suggested, "you could come to Chicago. We've got plenty of space. Lily would be thrilled to show her cousin around the city once she's old enough." "I want to see the Big Bean," Lily chimed in excitedly, referencing Cloud Gate, the reflective sculpture downtown. "The Bean is pretty cool," James agreed, earning a wide, delighted grin from her. As the sun began to dip below the trees outside, the gathering started to wind down. Most of the guests had left, but our core group lingered, savoring this rare sense of unity. Plans were made for the following day, lunch at Mom's house, all of us together, no formal agenda, just a chance to share a meal, talk more, and begin the slow process of truly rebuilding. At the door, as we prepared to leave, Mom hesitated. Then she stepped forward and hugged me carefully, her arms awkward around my baby bump. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for so many things." "Me too," I said honestly, returning the hug. "But we're here now, that's what matters." The car ride back to the hotel was quiet. Lily had fallen asleep almost as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot, curled up in her car seat with her doll clutched to her chest. Thomas reached over and took my hand. "Proud of you," he said simply. I smiled and squeezed his fingers. "I'm proud of us," I replied, watching the familiar streets of my childhood town blur past the window. It hadn't been easy, but for the first time in years, I felt like I had a whole family again. The one I'd built with Thomas and the one I was born into, both flawed, both precious, both mine. 3 months later, a brisk wind off Lake Michigan rustled the golden leaves on the trees outside our apartment. Autumn had arrived in Chicago with its usual flair. I was arranging a bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus on the dining room table, our panoramic windows overlooking the glittering lakefront. Our home, usually a haven of peace, hummed with nervous energy. I checked the time again. "They're just family," Thomas reminded me, appearing behind me to straighten a place setting. "Everything's going to be fine." "I know," I said, resting a hand on my now very prominent 8-month belly. "It's just strange having them here, in our space." "Good strange or bad strange?" he asked, wrapping his arms gently around my shoulders. "Different strange," I said after a pause, "but I think good." The doorbell rang before I could say more. Lily shrieked and bolted from her room, where she had been carefully selecting toys to showcase. "They're here!" she squealed, practically vibrating with anticipation. Thomas opened the door to reveal Mom, Becky, and James. They looked a little overwhelmed, Mom clutching a large gift bag, Becky balancing a cake tin precariously on her rounded belly, now nearly as large as mine. But they were smiling. "Welcome to Chicago," Thomas said warmly, taking the bag and the tin from their hands. Mom stepped inside first, her eyes finding mine instantly. "Carol," she breathed, "look at you. You're glowing." The sincerity of the compliment caught me off guard. "Thanks, Mom. How was your flight?" "Better than I feared," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her coat. "Though these old bones weren't made for air travel." "Grandma!" Lily cried, rushing forward and launching herself into Mom's arms. Mom knelt, slowly, stiffly, but her expression was pure joy. "There's my sweet girl," she said, enveloping Lily in a hug that seemed to erase months of missed time. "I missed you so much," Lily exclaimed. "I drew you pictures, and I have a new dance to show you. And tomorrow we're going to the Bean." Mom laughed, truly laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so light-hearted, that it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "We have all weekend, sweetheart," she said. "We'll do everything on your list." While Lily gave Mom the grand tour of her coloring pages, Becky made her way over to me. She rubbed her belly and grinned. "Hey sis," she said, bumping her stomach gently against mine. "Look at us. Synchronized pregnancies." "I feel like a beached whale," Becky confessed, her voice tinged with humor and exhaustion. I laughed and gave her a careful side hug, mindful of the prominent bumps between us. "Well, we make quite the pair. Two very pregnant Mitchell sisters, waddling around like synchronized swimmers with extra cargo." "The doctor says everything's perfect," she added, placing a protective hand over her belly. "Just 2 more weeks to go." "And 4 for me," I reminded her, though I gently rubbed my stomach. "Thomas is convinced this little guy isn't waiting that long. He's starting to run out of space in there." From the kitchen, where he was helping James unpack a few bags, Thomas called out, "At this point, he's going to evict himself." Once we got our guests settled, Thomas took over as tour guide, leading them through our apartment. I stayed behind in the kitchen, finishing up the final touches for lunch, but I could hear Lily's excited voice echoing down the hallway. "This is my room, and that's my desk where I color, and look, you can see the lake from my window." There was something surreal about hearing these familiar voices, my mother's, my sister's, in a space that had for so long belonged entirely to Thomas, Lily, and me. Our quiet, carefully built life was suddenly filled with sounds of my past mingling with my present. Returning to the dining room, Mom looked around, clearly impressed. "Your place is beautiful, Carol, so bright, open, and it feels like a home, not just an apartment." "Thank you," I said, pleased by her genuine compliment. "Tomas deserves most of the credit for the design. He's got the artistic eye." "She's being modest," Thomas interjected, coming to stand beside me. "Carol was the one who found this place in the first place, back when it was a total wreck. She walked in and saw potential no one else did." "Just like your father," Mom said, the words slipping out soft and unguarded. "He always had that gift. He could see what something could become, not just what it was." The mention of Dad, spoken so casually yet tenderly, caught me off guard. She rarely talked about him after his death, and I felt a surprising lump in my throat. "I never thought of it that way," I said quietly, touched. "But I guess you're right." We gathered around the table for lunch, the conversation flowing more naturally than I'd expected. Lily, ever the star of the show, regaled everyone with tales from preschool, her teacher's silly hats, a class hamster escape story, and her recent art project that had earned a superstar sticker. Meanwhile, James and Thomas bonded over their mutual love of craft beer, launching into an animated debate over Chicago's best breweries. Watching them engage, laughing like old friends, brought an unexpected warmth to my chest. During the lull, Mom turned to me. "Thomas mentioned you two run your own marketing agency now. Matthews and Mitchell, was it?" I blinked, caught off guard by her curiosity. "Yes, we started it 3 years ago after leaving our corporate jobs. Thomas handles the design and creative direction, and I manage strategy and client relations." "That sounds like a perfect partnership," she observed, nodding thoughtfully. "It is," I agreed, smiling at Thomas. "We balance each other really well." "Are you still working this close to your due date?" Becky asked, her tone more curious than judgmental. "Mostly from home," I said. "We have a great team in place, and our business partner Angela will step in more once I take some time off." "I'm impressed," Becky admitted, and this time the admiration felt entirely sincere. "I've been on maternity leave for a month already. I just couldn't handle 25 first graders anymore, not with this belly." "Different jobs, different demands," I said with a shrug. "That's the beauty of having choices. We all do what works best for our families." Mom nodded slowly, as though digesting something deeper. "I think I'm only just beginning to understand that," she said. "That there's no one right way to be a woman, a mother, a person." Her words hung in the air like a sudden breeze through a window. Unexpected but refreshing. In all my years, I don't think I'd ever heard her articulate anything so open-minded, so reflective. After lunch, while Thomas showed James the home office setup, Becky, Mom, and I settled in the living room with tea. Lily, keeping to her routine, had tucked herself into her bedroom for quiet time, flipping through books with her favorite doll by her side. "I brought something," Mom said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a well-worn photo album. "I thought Lily might like to see what her mom looked like when she was her age." "She'd love that," I said, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Mom." As she opened the album and began turning pages, the past rushed back. Becky and me in matching Easter dresses, grinning under pastel bonnets. Building a snowman in our front yard with red cheeks and lopsided scarves. Sitting on Dad's lap while he read from our favorite storybook. His smile gentle and amused. "I forgot about these," I murmured, brushing my fingers over a photo of us at the county fair, sticky-fingered and sunburned. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months, Mom said, flipping to the next page slowly. Looking back at these old pictures, remembering how things used to be, and how they changed. Becky and I glanced at each other, but said nothing, waiting. When your father died, Mom continued, her voice steady but soft, I was lost. Robert was my anchor. He balanced me. Without him, I clung to what felt familiar. Becky stayed close, followed a path I understood. But you, Carol. She paused, lifting her gaze to mine. You were so much like him. Independent, driven, seeing potential in everything. It was beautiful. And it scared me. Scared you? I asked, caught off guard by the rawness of her confession. Every time I looked at you, I saw him. Not just in your face, but in your choices, the boldness, the dreaming. And it hurt. It reminded me of what I lost. Focusing on Becky felt easier. Safer. I sat frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of understanding crashing over me. All these years I thought she favored Becky because she disapproved of me, of my path, my ambition. I never considered that I might have reminded her too much of someone she loved and missed every single day. I'm not saying it was right, she added. It wasn't. It was unfair to you. But I need you to know, Carol. It was never because I loved you less. I just couldn't see past my grief. Tears stung my eyes and I reached for her hand. Thank you for telling me. That means more than you know. I wish Dad could have met Thomas and Lily, Becky said, her own eyes shimmering. And our babies. He would have been the proudest grandpa in the world. Would have adored them, Mom said, her voice thick with emotion as her eyes lingered on the framed photo of Dad on the bookshelf. Your father would have been over the moon for both of you. He always dreamed of this, watching his daughters raise families of their own. And I know without a doubt, he'd be bursting with pride. Before anyone could respond, the soft shuffle of small feet reached us. Lily emerged from her bedroom, rubbing her eyes with her fists, her curls in gentle disarray from her nap. I heard you talking about Grandpa, she mumbled, climbing up beside me on the couch. I wrapped an arm around her, tucking her close. We were looking at some pictures, sweetheart, I explained, holding out a photo of me as a young girl, standing proudly next to a sandcastle at the beach. Lily studied it with awe. That's you? She gasped. You were little like me? Her innocent amazement made everyone chuckle, the warmth in the room blossoming again. Even mommies were little once, I said, smoothing her hair. Grandma too? She asked, wide-eyed. Even Grandma, Mom replied with a chuckle, though that was a very long time ago. The rest of the afternoon passed in a warm, honeyed blur. Thomas and James returned, laughter followed, and plans for the weekend began to take shape. A visit to the Bean, as Lily called Cloudgate, the Shed Aquarium, and a dinner at the upscale restaurant Thomas and I had saved for a special occasion. That night, after our guests had returned to their hotel and Lily was tucked into bed, Thomas and I stood together in the dimly lit living room. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline glittered under a clear night sky. It was quiet, peaceful. That went better than I expected, I admitted softly, leaning into him. She's trying, Thomas said, rubbing slow circles on my back. Your mom, I mean. I can tell it means something to her. All of this. It does, I nodded. It means something to me too. I want Lily to know her family, even if it's complicated. His hand moved down to rest on my belly, where our son was doing his usual nighttime gymnastics. So, about your mom's offer, have you thought more about it? Earlier that day, Mom had surprised me by suggesting she come stay for a few weeks after the baby's birth, to help with Lily and ease the transition. My knee-jerk reaction had been uncertainty. The history was there. The wounds were real, but I'd also seen something new in her eyes today. Something honest, raw, and willing. I have thought about it, I said, turning to look up at him. And I think, yes, I want her here, I want to try. Thomas kissed my forehead. Family's never easy, he said, but it's always worth trying for. The next morning we met outside Cloud Gate. Lily, brimming with energy, darted between reflections, dragging Mom and Becky by the hand. Look, she called out, laughing, I can see all of us at once in the Bean. I moved closer, Thomas wrapping his arm around my waist. In the polished steel, our distorted images stood side by side. 3 generations, all bent and blended by reflection, but unmistakably together. 2 weeks later, my phone buzzed at 3:22 a.m. It was James. Becky had gone into labor. By the time the sun rose over Pennsylvania, Emma Grace had made her entrance into the world. a healthy, pink-cheeked bundle swaddled in a polka-dot blanket. Becky's eyes were tired but sparkling as she showed her off via video chat. "She's perfect," she whispered. "I can't wait for her to meet her cousin." "Only a few more weeks," I said, rubbing my belly. Except it wasn't weeks. 3 days later, our son arrived early. Eager, wriggling, and loud. Robert Thomas Matthews, named for the man who had loved us without condition and left too soon. In our hospital room, Lily stood beside me, peering curiously at her brother's tiny wrinkled hands. Thomas looked on with pride, one arm around Lily's shoulder. The tears came without warning. Tears of joy, yes, but also grief, relief, forgiveness. A lifetime of emotions pouring into one quiet, perfect moment. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Becky. "How are my nephew and my favorite sister doing? Mom's flying in tomorrow. She says she can't believe she got 2 grandkids in the same week." I smiled, one hand cradling Robert, the other typing. "We're doing great. Can't wait for Emma and Robert to meet. They should grow up knowing each other. Really knowing each other." The screen blurred as I stared at the message, the weight of it sinking in. It was real. We were doing this. Not just making peace, but choosing to build something new. Family isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to love, even when it's hard. It's about being brave enough to let people see the real you. It's about forgiveness, for others and for ourselves. There will be more difficult days, moments where old hurts rise up uninvited. But now, there's also a shared commitment to honesty, to growth, and to each other. That's what I want to teach my children. That connection doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from facing the messy parts, owning your truth, and letting people in anyway. And if you've ever had to sit down and tell a difficult truth to someone you love, you know that moment can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff. But what you don't always see is the bridge waiting to form beneath your feet the second you take that first brave step. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll leave a comment, share your experience. Tell us about the time you faced a hard tooth and found your way through it. Because sometimes the first step to healing isn't fixing everything, it's simply knowing you're not alone. Thank you for spending Mozart time with me, and remember, it's never too late to reach out, to rebuild, and to belong. You are enough, just as you are.